So a while ago, I wanted to do a presentation on the energy environment. So right now, we're going through a pretty significant revolution in how we power our world. And I thought that one of the reasons it's important to talk about it is because whether we're having disputes domestically or at the US level or local level, a lot of us is just folks don't know how things have changed over the last few years. And if they had that information, then they'd make different decisions about how they both power their world and local and federal decisions. So I started to create this presentation that talks about that revolution. So I'm going to talk about some of the technology changes. I'm going to talk about the 3 reasons why this revolution is going to happen. Then I'm going to touch on impacts to climate change, and then I'll close with how this affects Naperville. So I'll talk at a global level for the beginning parts of it, and then we'll talk about how those global trends impact our local communities. So I'm starting out with a question. So the question is, who burns more coal to generate their electricity, Ireland or England? So if you think it's Ireland, raise your hand that they burn more coal than England. Okay, so I've got a few people, Ireland. Okay, now then everyone else thinks England. So who thinks England burns more coal? Okay, so a few more hands for that. So it was a trick question because both of them have shut down all their coal plants. So it's a tie for 0. Either England or Ireland, both of them have moved away from coal and don't burn it all. If I ask you the question, which burns more coal, Naperville, Ireland, or England, it would be Naperville, but we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. So don't feel bad if you got the question wrong, because the experts are getting this wrong all the time. So these 3 charts up here, you can see a solid green, blue, and red line. Those are the actuals. So actually, I can walk right over here. So these are the actuals in terms of how much U.S. coal was used in those years. And you can see so the actuals are the solid lines. Then these gray lines are the predictions. So in 2007, the Energy Information Agency estimated how much coal was going to be used. And they said in 2007, I think it's going to go up. The U.S. economy is growing. Coal is a major source of electricity. So coal use is going to go up with electricity, right? Kind of logical. But in fact, it starts to plummet. And why does it plummet? Because new technology comes around. So the new technology in the case of the coal here is fracking. Natural gas fracking becomes more popular. Electric gas prices decline significantly. And so the coal that they thought they were going to burn, they didn't actually burn. We burned more natural gas than to generate electricity. 2012, same thing. They keep thinking new technology is going to be there, still there. Coal starts declining. And then the other factor, then, as we move in out years, you're back on this chart here on the left, which is how much solar is being added to the grid. And these are global numbers. These are global charts up here. So this isn't just the United States. So you can see every year they're like, hey, you're around 200 megawatts of solar. I think you're going to stay there for a very long time. I don't think solar is going to catch on as much. You've made it up to the point where solar makes sense, and then it's going to flatten out. And every time, they don't seem to learn their lesson that the amount of solar being added to the grid continues to increase. So today, in the United States, solar is the #1 way. When we add to electricity to the grid, the most popular power source is solar here in the United States. That's true globally as well. Actually, at a higher percentage globally, solar is the most popular way that people add new generation to the grid. And so that change in electricity generation is resulting in this major transformation. And you might hear, I've heard it now in a few different podcasts where they talk about this electrotech revolution. So the electrotech revolution. So what they're saying is, we aren't making an incremental change. It isn't that you're just going to add some EVs and solar to the grid, but a combination of a number of technologies are coming together that's going to create a completely different way that we're powering our world. And that's the electrotech revolution. I'm going to get a lot of exercise walking back to this. Oh, wait, there's a clicker. Let's see if this actually works. No. You can click too. So here are the three pieces of how we use energy in this world and why they're dramatically changing. So on the left is generation, right? How do we generate electricity? And that's largely dominated by solar and wind. You can see those curves look pretty steep, right? It starts low and then it shoots up. And I want you to think about these technologies more like the iPhone than you would about traditional technology. So for those of you who are around when the iPhone came out, a lot of us, I was one of them. I love my BlackBerry. It was always in my hand. I had to have my BlackBerry. iPhone comes out 2 years later, BlackBerry crashes. It isn't that customers said, hey, some of us like the iPhone better, some of us like the BlackBerry better. We're like, nope, we all like the iPhone better. We stopped buying BlackBerries altogether. People convert off of BlackBerries onto iPhones. That's how technical innovations, that's the kind of things you see in technical innovations. And we're going to talk about the concept of the tipping point in a couple of slides. But so 3 components to this change in how we're powering our world. The left mode is around generation, solar and wind. You can see dramatic increases in the amount of solar and wind that are getting added to the grid. The second piece is around storage. So storage and transportation. The story here is around battery. And if you think about batteries are to electricity what the refrigerator is to food. So 100 years ago, if you wanted milk for breakfast in the morning, you better have a cow nearby, right? You had to be near where it was being produced, because if you weren't near the cow, the milk would spoil, didn't transport, there wasn't an easy way to get moved around. So now, with the battery revolution, you can generate your power anywhere at any time, and you're going to have the electricity come to you. And then the third piece is on the demand side. So you can see, like, this curve almost looks spaced because it shoots right up in terms of EV adoption and heat pump adoption. So how we're consuming that electricity is changing as well. And the reason why we're seeing these kinds of changes, there's a principle called Wright's Law. And what that says is every time you double the cumulative amount of a particular item, you're going to see a set drop in prices. So what's happened is you've got solar cells. And the price in solar, I'll show you a slide in a couple minutes, that solar dropped about over 99% from where solar cost previously. So massive decline. What happened? Initially, we were making solar and using it with the space program, handful of cells, very expensive. But what's happened over time is we keep increasing the amount that we're spending on solar. So more solar panels are being built. And here's how it works. So I'm selling a handful of solar. The more solar I sell, the more money I can pump into R&D, and the more money I can put into improving my manufacturing processes. So that forces the price of solar down. Now because the price is lower, I'm selling more, so I still have more to put into R&D and improving my processes. And it's a positive reinforcing cycle that you can see with some of these electrotech technologies, where the price keeps coming down, and it's not been coming down for like 5 years or 10 years. You can see you're going back decades that these technologies have continued to decline in price. So what does that look like? These reductions in prices, which are just huge. The efficiency improvements have allowed dramatic reductions in price. So if we just look at the last 10 years, and let's take a look at solar first. And let me explain this chart, because I was showing this to my wife, and she's like, there's just so much on these charts. There's a lot to understand. So you can see over the last 10 years, price of solar declined by 77%. is amazing. I'm sure you can't think of many products that you can buy that dropped 77% over the last 10 years. But I want to talk about these ranges. So as it's dropping, you get into this gray area, which is the fossil fuel range. What that gray area means is that if I have to decide, I'm a city and I need more generation, I can buy a gas plant, I can buy a solar farm, and it's saying the prices of building new, I'm about to say, I'm indifferent in this area, that the cost of solar and the cost of gas are about the same. The next range down is marginal cost. So what that means is I have a choice now. Solar has gotten so cheap that even if I already own the asset, I own a gas plant, I own a coal plant, and the cost to mine it, in the case of coal, the cost to mine it, crush it, burn it, that is higher than the cost of solar. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of coal plants around the country. Up until this year, we're getting retired at a pretty good clip. The other thing I wanted to talk about is battery. So you can see, like, again, amazing price decline as the volume, I'll show you a slide in a few minutes about the volume of batteries that has increased. So we're manufacturing so many more batteries, Wright's law is kicking in, and the price keeps dropping on batteries. This gray area, ICE, for those who don't see this concept, ICE stands for internal combustion engine. So when they say an ICE car, it means a gasoline powered car. Okay, so that's what and TCO stands for total cost of ownership. So we're saying as EV prices have come down, it's cheaper for you to have an EV than it is for you to have. I'm sorry, when you get the gray area, it's cheaper for you to own and operate. The total cost of that EV is less than a gasoline powered car. Now, for those who own EVs, you don't pay for oil changes, you don't pay for spark plugs, you don't pay for transmission fluid. I've had my car for 25,000 miles and I've rotated the tires. So, and then on top of it, my fuel costs are lower than had I bought gasoline. So when I bought the car, if I bought a comparable gas-powered car, the EV was more expensive. Over the life of the EV, it becomes less expensive. But now, as EV prices continue to decline, we get to the point to where you could buy an EV and the price is going to be lower than the gasoline powered car, and then after you buy it, all your maintenance costs are lower for that EV as well. Because I don't think I said this, depending on the car, between 20 and 40% of an EV is the cost of the battery. So every time that battery comes down in price, the cost of EVs comes down. So I've talked about these, this is all like historical information, but you can get that Wright's law doesn't just stop in 2026. It continues on. The number of EVs is going to continue to increase, and Wright's law is going to continue to drive those prices down. Batteries, solar, wind, you'll still continue to see those declines. And then, so there are a couple of forecasts here. The FAST is like a more conservative estimate in terms of the price declines, and faster is more aggressive estimates in terms of the price declines. But either way, we get to the point to where you're not going to make a decision, do I buy an EV or a gasoline car? Everyone's going to buy an EV. You're not going to make the decision, do I buy a gas plant to generate my electricity, or do I buy solar wind? I'm going to buy solar and wind because it's always going to be less expensive. It's kind of like that iPhone, BlackBerry thing. You're going to get to a point, a tipping point, where you're like, I'm never going to buy that other product. It's more expensive. It doesn't have the functionality of the product that I can buy. So I'm going to talk, I mentioned there are going to be 3 reasons why this revolution is going to happen. This is the first of those 3, which is cost. Wright's law is forcing all those costs down, and they're just going to be more inexpensive. Whether you care about the environment or not, that's irrelevant. From a strictly investments that you're going to make, you're going to want to invest in these. And just to give you a sense of what this looks like, this is batteries, and you can see prices coming down dramatically, and no one would have predicted 200% year-over-year increases in battery usage, but that's the case. And it's the case because we've got, if you remember those three things, we produce, we store, and we use. The wind and solar drive down the cost of electricity, the cost of battery, then people want to use batteries in more applications. And then as the cost of batteries come down, there's even more applications that you want to put batteries in. So initially it might have been, I'm trying to think of an old use battery. You have battery in your car, right? In your gas car. Now I have a battery in my lawn, battery in my snowblower, a battery in my car. So as the cost of batteries came down, you use batteries in more applications. So I just want to talk about how this looks in the real world. So this is before the energy workshop, before the city's energy workshop this last summer, I created this slide. I went out, there's a site, it's free, Grid.io, Grid Status IO, and you can just take a snapshot of how power on any grid in the United States is operating. So I went to that site and took a snapshot. On the x-axis, this is time of day. So you see around 6 o'clock, the sun comes up, and solar in California starts to dominate. It pushes out. This blue is natural gas. You reduce the amount of natural gas. Hydro, they reduce the amount of hydro that they're pushing through as well, because solar is dominating the grid. And in fact, in California, most days, actually this week, even in the winter in California, the price of electricity goes negative during the day. There's so much energy on the grid that prices go below zero. So that's awesome, but everybody has heard the question, well, what happens when the sun isn't shining, right? This is awesome that we've got solar is driving down prices during the day, but what happens at night? And you're starting to see a little more battery on the grid. So if I show you that chart's the hour by hour, this is a chart that the brown line is how things were operating in 2019. So matches up, no matter these two lines are solar plus storage. And in 2019, very little storage on the grid. Sun comes up, sun comes down. That's all that solar is used for. Now you look at 2025, and you can see at midnight, you're using electricity that was generated from solar. That cheap solar is filling up batteries during the day, and then they're discharging those batteries all night long. So what I want to kind of highlight here is how they complement each other. If there weren't batteries, once you had enough solar to power California during the day, you'd stop buying solar panels, right? There's no point in buying more solar if you're already driving the prices negative during the day. But when I add battery to it, now you're going to buy more solar because that solar is filling up batteries and you're discharging the batteries at night. Similarly, so I'm saying solar is then driving battery usage. On the flip side, because solar is so cheap during the day, people are buying batteries. So if solar wasn't so cheap during the day, people wouldn't buy batteries. But since it is, both the number of batteries purchased and the number of solar panels purchased, they're complementary and they're driving each other up. And that's moving us to a world in the lower right where you see the daytime solar spikes up, just like we saw in that previous graph. But now I can buy enough battery today, and battery's cheap enough that I can run my state, run my city, run my grid on battery and solar. I'm not saying that's the best idea, because I think a portfolio of energy is important, but I'm at the point economically now where solar is cheap enough and battery is cheap enough that I can go 24 hours a day. So that's the answer. If someone asks you what happens when the sun isn't shining, you introduce it into a flashlight, and you say, in the same way this flashlight stores power and I use it at night, I've got grid scale batteries that I can use. So because of that, what's happened? Well, for the first time ever in the United States, the amount of clean power, so that's wind, solar, and nuclear, are exceeded the amount of fossil fuel, so coal and gas that's being burned in the United States. The other thing that you're seeing is dramatic increases in different states. So now we have some states that are over 30% of their overall energy is coming from solar. So if someone says, hey, the grid in Illinois, I don't know if it can handle all these renewables, you say, we're at 3%, we're at 3%. There are states that have 10 times as much solar on their grid already. I think our grid can handle that additional usage. Okay, second question. This one might be a little bit easier, especially since you know you're at a meeting about new technology. So what uses more power? An EV that's going down the highway at 55 miles an hour, or a gasoline-powered car that's in the parking lot, in park, idling? So which do you think the parked car uses less electricity? I mean, the less energy? So the short answer is the EV uses less energy than the ICE car that's just sitting in the parking lot. And that's because EVs are 2 to 3 times more efficient than gasoline cars. So anybody who has a gasoline car, you lean against the hood and you're gonna feel a lot of heat on that, right? After it's been running a while, you've got a lot of heat. That gasoline that you're burning is generating heat, and the hundreds of parts that you have inside your car generate friction, which is where you're getting that heat. And so on an EV, you don't have any of that. So the energy that you're using goes to turning the wheels versus heating the motor.
Change that slide.
Oh, yeah, I guess I do need to, thank you.
We're paying attention.
Thank you. So this, in the upper right corner, you can get the math. That's the math about why a EV on the highway uses less energy than a gas car that's idling. So I just showed you an example about EVs being more efficient than gas cars. That's true for a lot of different energy sectors. So whether you're doing manufacturing, you're doing pumping, you're doing air conditioning, you're heating, electricity is more efficient than fossil fuels in all of those sectors. So what's happening is, let's use heating as an example. People used to exclusively, or people in this part of the country use gas furnaces, right? Gas furnace to heat your house in the winter. We now have a heat pump in our house. So instead of using gas, we're using electricity. That's true whether you're in a manufacturing company and you used to use gas boilers and you've switched over to electric boilers. So the amount of electricity that you're using has increased. And in fact, you can see in a number of different sectors. So this is buildings, right? Over time, more buildings are being built. And actually more buildings are being air conditioned now. So the amount of energy that you're using in your buildings continues to increase. That makes perfect sense, right? Buildings are using up more energy. But when we look at fossil fuels, you'll see it's not increasing at the rate that the overall usage is. It's a little flatter. And in fact, in 2018, we hit a plateau where the amount of fossil fuel isn't increasing at all. And that's because people are switching more devices. So I told you about my electric lawnmower and my electric snowblower. So people are switching to those because they're cheaper, more efficient. And as they make that transition, and especially businesses make that transition, it flattens out their fossil fuel use. So that was true in buildings in 2018. It was true in manufacturing in 2014. And then you're looking at the last one on the far left, which is transportation. You're like, okay, it does not look like we've hit a plateau, right? There's no plateau there. But I'm telling you, that plateau is coming. Because these are the numbers in terms of electric vehicle usage. And you can see dramatic increases in the number of EVs. And I'm going to show you some more charts that show that shooting up. So this is the second reason. So why this transition is going to happen. It's inevitable. The first was cost. The second was the efficiency around electric vehicle, or around electrical devices. And so this is a little bit of an eye chart. So I'm going to walk you through this. So the left is the year 2000 and the right is 2025. Dark green are the sectors where electric equipment uses electricity, surprisingly. So anything that's dark green is something that's using electricity today. Light greens means you could switch to electricity. It's economical, I get the same functionality, but it isn't widespread use yet. And then yellow is, it's more expensive. So back in 2000, if I said I wanted to heat my house with a heat pump, I showed you how heat pumps were less efficient 25 years ago. It would have cost me more money to heat my house up with electricity in the year 2000. But now we go ahead to 2025, and you can see a lot of these sectors where you could electrify things, but the cost is too high. Those devices are more efficient. So where you might have put gas in the house, now you're putting in a heat pump, or where you might have put in a low temperature boiler in a manufacturing organization, now you're putting in an electric boiler. So that was the second reason. So that was, if you're an engineer like I am, there's some interesting stuff here. We're going to make a transition now to those of you like social science. So we're going to talk about the geopolitical reasons why this energy transition is going to happen. So I start all sections off with a question. So which country has the highest percentage of new electric car sales? So of all their car sales, which country has the highest percentage? China, Germany, United States, or Nepal? So raise your hand if you think it's Germany. Nobody. Germany's a big car country. Nobody went Germany. China, how many people think China has the highest percentage of new vehicles? So a lot of China looks like it's going to be the majority. The United States? No, you're right. It's not the United States. Nepal? Okay, we got two people that went with Nepal, and my wife saw the presentation. So I don't know if you went with Nepal because it was like, okay, that's way out there. He didn't pick Nepal by accident. So Nepal has the highest percentage of new car sales being electric. So let's talk about Nepal, because there are a lot of countries like Nepal. We'll talk about that in a second. So Nepal gets 99% of its electricity from renewables. 98 comes from hydro, and 1% comes from solar. The other thing about Nepal is it's in the majority of countries in that it doesn't produce any oil and doesn't have any coal. Any fossil fuels are imported into Nepal. And then I forgot to ask you another question. What company produces the most EVs in the world? Does anyone? You just shout it out. Okay, so yeah, you guys are right. I thought someone might say Tesla. Tesla got passed up in 2025 by the Chinese manufacturer BYD. So Nepal is right on the border with China. So ample renewables, no fossil fuel, easy access to electric vehicles. They're up, what I think it was like 80% of all new vehicles in Nepal are electric now. So this is that little blue arrow. It's Nepal, and right now, if you look at the colors on the map, what it's saying is, all the green sections you have more renewable capacity. Sorry for those who are. You have more renewable capacity than energy use. And what I mean is, Nepal can generate much more renewables, actually 100 times based on their geography of what they use than what they're actually using, right? 100 times, if they put solar panels in, took more advantage of hydro, will be 100 times about the electricity that they're using. But every country that's here in green has more than enough capacity to generate the electricity energy that they use from renewable energy. So this next chart is, I think it might be the most interesting And for me, it was one of the most surprising slides in the entire, that I saw when I was researching this. So on the left side in red are the 75% of the countries that import fossil fuel. So all these countries import fossil fuel. The 25% of the countries down here, these are fossil fuel exporters, right? So let's just to help you understand this chart, let me give an example. So Thailand, all the way on the left, 14% of its GDP is spent on importing fossil fuels. In Russia, way on the right, 20% of its GDP it gets by exporting fossil fuels. So if you're Thailand over there, you've got two big problems. One is those commodity markets for fossil fuels bounce all over the place, right? The price of oil jumps and goes down, and your economy, which you're spending a big chunk of your GDP on, is dependent. So whether you have a good year or a bad year, there's a lot dependent on whether the Gulf states are tightening oil supplies or loosening them. And the second reason is around, it was described as energy blackmail. So let's talk about what that means. So let's say you're in 2022, you're in Europe, and Putin invades the Ukraine, 2022. You don't like that, you impose sanctions on Russia, and Russia says to you, hey, if you impose sanctions on me, I'm not going to give you gas. You're not going to be able to heat your homes in the winter. You're not going to be running your manufacturing plants that all run on natural gas. You better be nicer to me than you would have been as I invaded part of Europe. In 2026, or end of 2025, you have President Trump saying to the EU, I want Greenland. And what leverage does the United States have? Well, on this chart here, you can see the number one import to Europe from the United States is natural gas, LNG, liquid natural gas, liquefied natural gas, and oil. So they import a lot of energy, fossil fuels from the United States. So when they're unhappy with the President of the United States, the United States is the largest producer of oil and gas in the world. We're also an exporter. When they're unhappy with us, they have less flexibility because they know that we can use that leverage against them. And I think this actually, I made this slide a couple days ago. So you've got the situation in Cuba now, where the Trump administration has put a blockade around Cuba. Cuba can't get any fossil fuels anymore. Today in the newspaper, they said they think there's one more day for airplanes to fly in Cuba before they run out of oil. So let's think about how some countries might deal with this. So if you're the EU and you've had this issue with Putin and now you've got an issue with Trump, what do? You spend a whole lot of money on wind and solar because you're saying, I don't want to be held hostage anymore. So wind and solar just passed up fossil fuels. In the US, it's nuclear, wind and solar passed up fossil fuels. In the EU, it's just wind and solar. And where is that coming from? Fossil fuels. You're reducing the amount of fossil fuels that you use. And what does that do from a political perspective? Whether Putin's going to screw around with the price of oil or gas, or the United States is, your economy isn't in jeopardy and they can't hold you that economic blackmail. So some of you might be saying, that's really nice, Joe. So I have now traded in my fossil fuel dependency for a solar panel dependency. And this chart tries to explain why that's not the case. So if I am, you're king of a small country, right? And you don't like the fact that Russia and the United States can control your destiny. And every month, you're getting a shipment of oil. And your economy shuts down like Cuba's is because you're not getting oil. What you could do is instead of buying the fossil fuels, you say, just once, I'm going to buy solar, I'm going to buy batteries, I'm going to buy EVs, and I'm going to buy heat pumps. And now, the next 20 years, I'm going to run with those technologies and I don't have to import anything. So if there's an oil embargo, if there's an oil price hike, if Russia invades Ukraine, all that fossil fuel price volatility, I just sign that away. I don't have to worry about that. And all the fuel I get, it comes from the sun. My country now has some autonomy and energy independence. And you can see, this is the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney. And in it he says, and I'll quote, this was last month at Davos, he said, countries need to have energy autonomy, and a country that can't fuel itself has few options. Right, so the other countries, the 75% of the countries that depend on those 25%, whether it's Gulf states, Russia, the United States, like maybe those aren't the countries I want to depend on. So let's talk about China for a second, because China is the world's biggest oil importer. So China heard this story too. They didn't even have to wait till Mark Carney said it. So what are they doing in China right now? They are they're investing in energy dominance. So they are saying, I don't have to depend on the Gulf states. I don't have to depend on Russia. What I'm going to do is make huge investments. So they invested a ton in energy technology, and now the number of patents that they had skyrocketed, and now China's #1 in clean tech patents. They invested in battery manufacturing, and they now China is #1 in terms of battery manufacturing. They said, hey, I can't compete with Germany and the United States on these ICE cars, these gasoline cars, but the market's all switching to electric. I can make those investments. China's #1 in car production now. And they're doing this. You might have heard the President Trump said that China doesn't have windmills. China actually has the most windmills in the world. You can see between wind and solar, China is #1 in renewable energy production in the world. So what has that done to them? The reliance on Russia, the reliance on the Gulf states, they now have their autonomy. And when I talk about those 3 columns, generation, storage, and usage, this is usage. Their timing went from one that didn't have much electrification to one that's better than the United States or the EU in terms of electrification. So they now control their destiny. So again, you're the king of that little country right now, okay? So you're like, okay, Joe convinced me. I want to get off of fossil fuels, but there are a million different ways that I use fossil fuels in my economy. What do I do? So you invest in 4 things, and you can get rid of 70% of your fossil fuel costs. And that's going to be solar, battery, EVs, and heat pumps. So this data is a little low. This is from 2022. This is worldwide spending on fossil fuels. If instead you invested in renewable energy, EVs, because they're a big source of electricity usage in your economy, and heat pumps, you could get rid of 70% of your oil dependency, which now gets you to that energy shocks don't impact your economy as much, and the energy blackmail that other countries can use for leverage, now it's a much smaller piece of the pie for you in terms of the impact that it can have on your economy. So in closing on this section, I want to touch on one last thing, which is, let's think about what the impact is to those fossil fuel economies. So I talked about those tipping points. More than 50% of the new cars in China now are EVs. Their oil usage is going to go 50% this year. It's going to increase next year, just as you saw, economies are using more EVs. Their oil demand is going to decline. So again, their forecast, conservative, more aggressive. you're going to quickly reduce the amount of coal and oil that's used worldwide. If you're Russia, 20% of your GDP is from exporting fossil fuels. What's that going to do to your country? And then similarly, if you work in the Permian Basin in Texas, how does that change your world when oil production is going to decline? So if you're king of that small country, you're producing fossil fuels, what do you do about that? Well, what you do is you change the laws. You subsidize things, you put up tariffs, you try to figure out how you're going to keep those jobs, how you're going to slow this transition as much as possible. And governments can absolutely do that. So let's look at some different governments around the world. There's these are 4 different categories. So these are mature markets. Think about like the EU. This is China. Emerging markets are small countries like Nepal, all over the world. And then these are the petrol states. So these are the Gulf states. Saudi Arabia, Qatar of the world. And this is how much they've adopted clean technology, clean generation technology. And you can see this is really steep curve, right? EU and again, is making those big investments in renewable energy so they can reduce their dependence on both Russia and the United States. But in the what's going on here in the petrol states? They've got policies in their countries that do not want renewables to win. They need oil and gas to win. And so they're going to put policies in place so that oil and gas continues to do as well as they can. In the United States, as the biggest producer of oil and gas in the world, it's in between emerging markets and petrol states in terms of what our adoption is today. So I'm going to talk, kind of switch gears. Everything, a lot of what I've talked about so far is global. I'm going to talk about the US right now. So this is the price of electricity in the United States today. You can see, in the past 5 years, 5% increase in inflation-adjusted cost of electricity, and it's been going up and continues to go up right now. And actually, some of the most recent information shows the prices increasing even faster in terms of the cost of electricity. So why is that? One, always think of electricity as a commodity. So it makes it pretty simple. It's supply and demand, right? So let's talk about demand first. So here in the United States, one of the things that's driving demand is data centers. So depending on how many data centers you think will get built, the forecast shows a little over 5% growth in electricity year over year. But you can see in the 60s and 50s when air conditioning started to roll out, we actually had a higher percentage of electricity at that point. So demand is something, it's not unprecedented, but it certainly is higher than it has been for the last 20 years. So I just told you, hey, we've got these new tools, we've got these new technologies, solar, wind. So this is the cost of new solar and new wind. There's the bottom of the chart. Less expensive than new natural gas, new coal. There is no new coal. No coal plant been built in the United States in over a decade. And then new nuclear. So I'm telling you, there's new tools to keep the cost down. So that should put pressure on the other direction, right? Not only is wind and solar the cheapest, but they're the fastest in terms of getting on the grid. So if I said, hey, we need demand right away, 18 months from the time I say, hey, I need a solar farm, I'm generating solar in 18 months. So we can turn around onshore wind and we can turn around solar really quick. So we should be able, as we see prices increase, to add wind and solar. So again, we're talking about the supply side. So what's happening now is, I told you governments can make this go slower or faster. So in terms of the federal government, these are articles about basically Wind permitting has largely stopped, and solar permitting that requires federal permitting has largely stopped as well. So if you can't get permits to build wind or solar, now you need to build, the most common right now would be gas or nuclear. Not only has that then affected us in terms of our ability to meet our energy demand that's driving prices up, but we had billions of dollars in new manufacturing, building new plants in the United States that have been stopped, that would be addressing and driving down the cost of energy. So this is one way in which the federal government is slowing the transition to the new technologies. And that slowing of the new technology means that you're going to more expensive technology. And if you are, so the alternative is gas, right? The most popular natural gas is picking up most of that. On the gas front, you've got, one of the challenges would be if you knew that there's somebody, if you make the investment for decades to put in a gas plant, and you know there's another technology that should the administration switch, that new technologies that come out, are you going to make that investment in gas turbines now, knowing that maybe in 5 years, that gas turbine is generating electricity that's more expensive than what's coming off solar panels, and so you're going to lose money on that gas plant. So I just talked about how the federal government is depressing the growth of solar and wind. On the other side, it is increasing the amount of expensive fossil fuels that you have to burn. So right now there are 8 coal plants in the United States. The federal government has said you have to keep those running. There's actually one in Colorado now that is actually, it failed, right? It broke down. They said, we're shutting it down. They planned on retiring the coal plant. Federal government said, no, you've got to get that coal plant back online. Ratepayers, anybody who's paying rates in that area is paying to get that coal plant up and working again. And that coal plant actually ran out of coal. The mine was completely mined out, so they have to bring in coal to an old coal plant to keep it running, and ratepayers are paying for that. And that's occurring not just in Colorado. There's one in Michigan, there's one in Illinois. So we're keeping coal plants on where the costs are higher. And the other thing that's going to drive your electricity prices higher is you've heard about the LNG, liquefied natural gas export terminals. So a lot of our prices in the US are set based on the price of gas. As we export more gas, again, that causes gas shortage. It's a commodity. You have to pay more for the gas. That drives electricity prices up. So all of those factors are contributing to electricity prices. That slide that I showed you, the prices continue to go up. It's supply and demand. It's really simple. So I'm going to shift gears now. And so I've talked about the transition, and I talked about the 3 reasons why this transition is going to happen. Governments can slow it down, but it's going to happen. Now I want to talk about the impact on climate change. So this is the UN climate change report that came out just a few months ago. This is the cover. And so you can see the arrow is not in the center of the bullseye, and they're saying we're off track for preventing the most significant damage of global warming. So what we set in Paris, the 1.5, we just passed 1.5. We know that global warming is going to continue. So the best model that I've seen is the one from MIT, and it talks about from the time that I was born to the time my grandchildren are as old as I am, the Earth's going to heat up about 6 degrees Fahrenheit. And it isn't like, there isn't something you can do. You can't flip a switch today to not make that happen, right? That you've already put that CO2 in the environment. So I just had temperature here, but every metric is pointing to the same thing, whether it's ocean temperatures, whether it's sea level rise, Arctic ice coverage, higher humidity levels, they're all telling the same story. The climate's getting warmer, the climate's changing. And they're all pointing to this rapidly changing environment. So unfortunately, The chart here shows the amount of CO2 in the environment. You see it continue going up to the right. This chart shows how much we're increasing the amount of emissions. So because more countries are industrializing still, the third world's industrializing, they're burning more things with fossil fuels. And so we're seeing the amount of emissions increase. We still haven't hit the peak in terms of how much CO2 we're putting into the environment. So the environment continues to get, the greenhouse gases will continue to warm, and they'll actually warm at a faster pace because we continue to burn fossil fuels. So in terms of that UN report, they kind of broke down 4 big reasons, the impact of that heating. The first is more extreme flooding, storms, and drought. We see that in Illinois. You're going to see that, you've probably read about the incurrence rates in Florida. So as you get more flooding, more extreme storms, that's damage that you're going to have. The second would be species loss. I put coral there. I actually like to dive. And at the rate that we're increasing, we'll have eradicated all coral species because of the warming oceans. And usually in a typical year before global warming started, we lost about 5 species a year. We're currently losing up to 10,000 times that normal rate now. So species loss is the second one. We will have more refugees. So we talked about the extreme storms. Places are going to be too hot for humans to live. And so there's going to be migration that we're going to have to deal with. So a refugee crisis from typically not the countries that cause the problem. It's going to be from the poor countries where refugees are leaving because they can't put in the resilience measures to make that a livable place. And then the fourth would be our agricultural impact. Crop yields will decline and water stress will increase. So the bottom line is it's too late to not have climate change. Now it's about what investments we have to make our environments more resilient so they can handle that climate change, and how do we address the fact that the planet's getting warmer. So after that cheery topic, I'm going to switch to Naperville. So we've talked globally about how this electrotech revolution is going to happen. So how does Naperville fit into that global, into that kind of global? Is it normal like some of the other countries? Is it a little bit different? And I really like this quote that said, well, the federal government may not be making the environment cleaner. Actually, emissions in the United States rose in 2025 after declining the last couple of years, 2 years before that. The local policies, we can make a difference in our local communities to significantly reduce emissions. So let's talk about that. Just to give you some background, so we get our electricity from an organization called IMEA. Actually, so IMEA generates 86% of the electricity they generate comes from coal. We signed a long-term coal deal 18 years ago, and that coal contract continues through 2035. So for the duration of the contract, we've generated more air pollution than the average Illinois resident, than the average United States resident. You can see in the United States and in the rest of the state, about 15% of the energy comes from coal, where here in Naperville, it's 87%. And similar to, I showed you a chart like earlier that showed coal declining in the rest of the country because natural gas came out. Well, we had signed up for coal. We helped build the coal plant, or we continue to pay for the coal plant that was built. And so our cost of electricity has been higher than surrounding communities. So the market here has lower costs than what we're paying. But since we signed that 28-year coal deal, we had to get our electricity from coal. So even when other new technologies like fracking came out, we didn't get those cost advantages because we were locked into purchasing coal. And you know, it's not that dissimilar to when I talked about, like, there are governments that are more aggressive in making things better or kind of hindering it. Here in Naperville, the city councilors, none of them are still on city council, but the city council that signed that deal 18 years ago locked us in, slowed us down in our transition to new renewables. Not only did they do it from a cost perspective, but from a pollution perspective, the IMEA's coal plant is the largest source of air pollution in the state of Illinois. So while the rest of the state got cleaner, we get in Illinois, about 50% of the power comes from nuclear plants, which have no emissions. And then natural gas makes up much of the rest of that. So we had dirtier, in addition to having more expensive electricity, we had dirtier electricity. And this is that chart that showed you, this is Naperville signed up here. They were talking about it in 2007, signed in 2008. And they said at city council meeting, when the city staff came to city council, they said, this is a no-brainer. Sign the coal deal. This is where the economy is going with coal. And so the one thing I say about all the things that are predictions is that you see the experts miss them all the time. And so one of the things that, you know, Nest recommended we not sign with IMEA, one of the reasons would be a 30-year contract is going to be the wrong deal, right? You need flexibility because you can switch from technology to technology. Maybe geothermal is going to crush solar in the future. I don't know, but I absolutely, there isn't anybody in the energy market that knows in 30 years when the next IMEA deal would end, which electricity source is going to be the least expensive. And similar to that quote that Mark Carney made about like energy autonomy, Naperville can do things to protect itself from rate increases and can do things to lower our costs. So we are in a unique position in that we own our distribution company. So the city owns electricity distribution, and that's unusual in the state. Owning distribution gives us unique capabilities if we use them to lower cost, whether it's behind the meter battery, demand response. There's a number of different technologies that we could be using to both protect ourselves from whatever's happening in the fossil fuel market, as well as drive down the amount of pollution that we're generating. So these are the takeaways that I want you to take away from this presentation. The first thing, good news, the energy transition is happening. And there are 3 reasons why there's no way going back, right? This is going to happen globally. There's going to be some administrations in some countries that are going to push against it, but because of cost declines, because of the efficiency of electric devices, and because of those geopolitical factors, this is happening. Already in the United States, 88% of the electricity that we added to the grid last year was renewable. This is gonna happen. The second piece is that politicians can push against this. So they can slow it, they can drive you to more expensive electricity sources, but your global competitiveness, it's gonna hurt our economy because we're gonna be paying for more expensive electricity, and it's gonna cost ratepayers more money because we're paying for not the best technology, but some older ones. And then the third is climate change is happening. It's not a if climate change might happen, and actually the models have gotten better because now that we've seen actual climate change, we can do, the models are better at predicting what climate change is gonna look like in Naperville versus in Australia. So we have better understanding of it because it's actually happening. So now it's about what can we do to both make our environments more resilient and what can we do to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions as fast as we can so that the worst impacts of climate change can be avoided. And what you can do, a number of things, you can control your own world. So if you don't want to be at if you don't want to worry about electricity prices going up, you can buy solar panels, and for 20 years, you're going to know what your electricity price is. But there are a bunch of other ways that you can make a difference in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and taking more control over how much you're going to spend. And I just listed some around, a number of different, now, we love our electric snowblower. That thing dies. Next day, we're out buying one. The other thing, Nest has a climate coach program. So if you're thinking about doing one of these projects, you can contact us. We have people who implemented those technologies that can talk you through how to do it. And then on the right side, as I said, governments can make this go slower or faster. So as you're making decisions about which candidates to vote for, we have the primaries coming up in just a couple weeks. Look at the candidate, see if they align with your values. So that is all I had for today. I thank you very much for your time. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Is this going to be up on the Nest webpage?
So the question was, is this going to be up on the Nest website? And the answer is yes. Yes, so you didn't have to, I should have said that when people were taking pictures. That would have been a good time to tell you that. What question do you have?
Yeah, you have a chart showing the cost of the new energy. And my question is, why the nuclear price is going up?
Why is nuclear continuing to go up? I'm not as knowledgeable about nuclear prices. I know from a safety perspective, I know which chart you're here. We look at nuclear. So there's much talk about small nuclear reactors, SMRs. Unfortunately, right now it's an idea. No one's actually built one. They're not in production. One of the reasons that nuclear prices have been more expensive than if you do a great gas plant, there are nice blueprints. You can build another gas plant. It's rinse and repeat. Every nuclear plant has been a custom plant. There's been talk about trying to standardize the designs, but that drives prices up as well. And then if you thought people didn't like a data center here in Naperville, think about how they feel about a nuclear plant nearby. Yeah. Yeah.
The last nuclear plant was also built more than 25 years ago, I think. So then there's just a cost of maintaining upkeep and they built it one from scratch at a scale that incredibly expensive with all the materials. We have aging technology. Our nuclear regulatory rules really haven't changed since the 1970s. They've loosened up a little bit, but we need to get these small modular reactors to really nuclear viable.
Yeah, and it's not clear when those. I know there's a lot of in terms of investments, the federal government's making more and continues to make investments in nuclear and geothermal, and actually just this past year there's another half a billion dollar subsidy for coal plants to try to fix coal plants so that they can extend the life of the coal plants. Is a new subsidy that was available here starting in 2025.
So it sounded that at the last city council meeting that 2019 is a year that they've tagged. Does that mean that are they going to be looking at alternatives for energy up until that time, or are they going to start then? Because it seems
So the question is,
I mean, not 2029.
yeah. So the question is when would the city start to look at replacing IMEA?
Right.
So the first answer is if at any point, if there are going to be 4 or 5, or depending on whether there'll be 4 or 5 new members, or there can be 4 or 5 new members on the council starting in April of 2027. So they could in April of 2027, depending on if those new members or the existing members change their mind, they could start the negotiations with IMEA. And IMEA has said, at least to this point, as of October last year, that they would be willing to sign a deal with us through 2055. So one option is the city signs a deal with IMEA, and they can do that at any point. There's no year that matters. In terms of other alternatives, so it's pretty unusual for the city to decide to go into the energy generation business itself. Like, it's unlikely that it's going to build its own plant. If it did, you could see there's some lead times in terms of the city doing that. So it's unlikely that the city is going to go into the electricity generation business. So then the next alternative would be to go with a power marketer. If they don't go with IMEA, there's a few dozen companies here in Illinois that sell to other communities and provide electricity. They're typically looking at 2 to 4 years advance notice to sign the contract. So I think the 2029 timing would be, at some point we need to do, you saw a couple councilmen at that meeting say, we should do an energy strategy. And Nest wholeheartedly agrees with that so far, we've only talked to one company, and we talked to them over and over again. We talked to them for 2 years, but we really need to explore all the alternatives. So I had that one slide that talked about demand response, and that there's a lot of different options in terms of what we can do. Yeah. So we could sign up. There are vendors that handle virtual power plants that let communities join that. We don't do that today. You could get some sort of physical hedge in terms of getting a solar farm that said, okay, they're going to put electricity on the grid, just like IMEA is putting coal power on the grid. You could do something similar with a solar, a wind, to reduce your greenhouse gas impact. But I think the short answer is those companies typically don't sign contracts 6 years in advance, because those companies are going to give you a firm price for your electricity, whereas IMEA does not give you a firm price. They tell you, depending on what their costs are, that's what you're going to pay for the electricity. Did that answer your question?
Kind of, I just want to be ready, what's going to be required of citizens, and how do we continue to encourage them to not stop looking at alternatives?
Yeah, so the question was, how do we make sure that the city continues to look at alternatives? And I think that's, whether it's the sending emails, the same way you that contact them, sending emails to folks, talking to you, using the 3 minutes of public comment, to saying that's important to you, and that we want to look at all the options available in Naperville. And I think one of the things you saw is there's just a lot of different options in the energy market. It's dramatically changing. And so us waiting till a later point when when those prices continue to drop, we'll have a better idea of how much we'd spend for our electricity.
Explain what behind the meter battery is. Is that us getting battery storage?
Yeah, so behind the meter battery is what we would typically do. So IMEA looks at us as one big City of Naperville entity, right? IMEA doesn't deliver electricity all the way to your homes. IMEA delivers it to a substation, and then the City of Naperville takes that electricity and delivers it to your homes. So behind the meter means IMEA would drop at a substation. Behind that substation, we'd have a big battery, and then that battery would feed the rest, would help. I'm kind of taking it up a level, but it would then would be a way that we would get our electricity. What the behind the meter battery, I think, does what I showed you in California, where during the day you're getting cheaper electricity, and then you're selling it when it's more expensive. So there's that energy arbitrage when you have a behind the meter battery. The other thing it does is our electricity bill has 3 components. Our electricity bill has 3 components: generation, transmission, and capacity. The transmission and capacity parts of the bill are the ones that have been going up the fastest. The generation has been flat, but transmission and capacity have gone up. If you have a behind the meter battery, what you do is you level out the way they charge you for transmission and capacity is based on your peak usage. If you have a battery, if IMEA is looking at us and seeing a battery, when usage is really high back in Naperville, we're discharging from the battery. When usage is low in Naperville, we're charging the battery up. So instead of our electricity bouncing around like between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. and 7 p.m., you're seeing a peak. Nope, you've got a battery that's providing some of the electricity between 6 and 7. So that lowers your transmission costs, that lowers your capacity costs. with a behind the meter battery, and we've run some numbers, and we could save ratepayers money today if IMEA would let us do it. So we want to have that
We
conversation.
can't do that.
IMEA doesn't allow us to do that right now, so we need to negotiate something with IMEA to try to let us do that. And the rest of the state, anyway, the rest of the state, you might have heard of electricity bill that just got passed in the state around energy. It's called SURJA. That allows other communities to do that. So they're going to have a time of use charge. So the rates are going to go up and down with the market. And so it's going to make that battery arbitrage. You're going to be able to make money with behind the meter battery, but that's what it is. Bruce, what question do you have?
Just, I think what she was mentioning was the 2029 date, and that's a key time for us to start looking at alternatives, because by 2030, before 2030 is over, we need to tell the IMEA that we're not interested in continuing the contract beyond 2035. If we don't, then the longer we delay telling them, we just continue to get their electricity. But the first time we can tell them, no, we don't want it, is 2030. So look at the alternatives in 2029, come up with some RFPs, look at the businesses, say, oh, we've got several good companies here. All right, IMEA, we're not going to use you guys in the future. That's the key for 2020.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. So Bruce made the point that in 2030 is the first year that we can tell IMEA that we don't want to extend the contract beyond 2035. Kathy, what question do you have? Or comment?
So you said Naperville would be a generator of electricity, but I think that there's actually a lot of potential. Like what I've read is that a community like Naperville could generate up to like 30% of our own electricity by, adding solar to the rooftops, putting it even on residential, putting it on parking lots, and then pair that with batteries. We're a more resilient island, and we're not getting those capacity charges and the transmission charges. It's like you want to rent or own. So, I think that that's where being our own electric utility, where we have so much opportunity, and we're also creating local jobs. We can also incentivize energy efficiency and pay people for that, and that's more local jobs. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I think Kathy was making the point that while 100% of our electricity, we can't generate that. We have the option of putting solar panels on our homes, solar panels on our businesses, putting meters in the same way that the city could put a behind the meter battery. You can put batteries in your home. Now, based on how IMEA bills, you don't save money doing that. It provides you a more resilient home if there is power outages, which, frankly, we don't have that often in Naperville because we've spent a lot of money burying our electric lines. But we have that. Actually, I should add that. I should have that on the slide to have, you guys can put your own solar panels on your houses today. Those benefits, there are still federal benefits around putting solar on your house today. That are going to be around for a couple more years. They're a little more complicated, and you have to lease the system, but you can still see a significant subsidy for solar panels in residential. Yes?
Do we, to that point, do we have data that supports the residential and business private investment in alternative energies and how that affects our picture?
So the question is around how investments in business, how the return that businesses or residents would see in terms of making the investments and putting in solar or other technologies.
Well, it's do we know what that is? How many residents and houses, how much energy is being generated by private investment in a home or a business with clean energy, and how does that affect the overall picture of Naperville in the future?
So the city does have some data on how many people have solar, because we're when you are generating solar. Anyway, so the short answer to your question is yes. The city does know how many folks are running solar. the city also knows that how many people take advantage of the EV credits. So Naperville is one of the highest communities in Illinois in terms of EV adoption. So the city has some data on that, yeah. I'm sorry, what was your question? Sorry, I have to
Can you help
point.
me understand why all the major warehouses and large buildings don't have solar? Is there not an incentive, or what's the back pressure on that?
And so the question is, why don't all businesses do that? And it's a really good question. So you see some businesses really take advantage of it, and you may not know. So actually Walmart is one of the companies that put solar on a lot of their buildings. IKEA, again, they have a standard solar project. And even there are businesses in the area, if Magic Gloves is a large manufacturer just south of here. Their roof is covered in solar panels. You wouldn't know it if you drove by it. But I think certainly I've talked to companies that are more interested in it, and I think they're interested in it for a couple of reasons. One is the reliability, just having it on site, and then the second is the cost variation. Like putting in solar allows them to avoid those kinds of costs. So it gives them more consistent pricing. So
There is an incentive?
is there a federal incentive right now for companies? I'm not sure.
No,
Okay,
there
thank
is not. It ended up with a big beautiful bill that ended up in December of last year. And I did a study of all the buildings in Naperville for solar. But the problem is structure and support. So engineering and having the support structure underneath all the roofs is expensive because you have to have a certain amount of weight capacity to the roof. And none of the, very few of the big buildings, like some of the warehouses, have that. So they have to be put up.
yeah, I've been talking to Bruce made the point that solar panels, you have to have a certain type of roof, a certain structural support for your roof in order to put panels on it. And there's a manufacturer that I've been talking to. They've got a huge plant, but that plant, you can put solar on it. So they're putting it on a field right next to the plant. Because it's cheaper to put it on the ground than it is to improve their roof to put it up there
But the solar incentives and the wind incentives are gone.
for commercial.
The only thing really that's left is your electric vehicle charging station for your house. It is 30% up through June 30th.
Also, if you're a non-taxable, like a government or a nonprofit, if you start construction before July 4th, the incentives are still there.
What question?
I just wanted to bring up the week from today. There was a data center talk. Did you say this already?
I did not.
Okay. Yeah, it's Congressman Phil Foster. He's holding it at the Wenz Center. It's in conjunction with North Central College. It starts at 7 o'clock. So anybody who wants to go and see, it's supposed to be like a community meeting. And there are several speakers. I think there's several speakers who will talk.
Is there a website or link for that? I don't.
Yeah, there is. I can get over the last and then. So that, but you don't have to register. There is a button to register, but it does say you can just come. They just want a registration so they get an idea of how many people.
Okay, last question. I think we get kicked out.
You're talking about all the impediments and the lack of removal of the incentives for wind and solar. So what is that going to do in terms of that growth curve that you showed us that's going up? I mean, 2 years from now, is it just going to level out, or
So
how bad is the impact going to be?
So it is a significant impact. We think what I've read is that greenhouse gas emissions kind of push out like 5 years in terms of the U.S. contribution. So the issue is the United States is one country, right? One country, obviously one that generates a lot of greenhouse gases. We still are, I think, I can't remember, number 2 or 3 in terms of greenhouse gas emissions per person. But the good news is that regardless of what our country does, globally, people are making the transition because of the cost advantages.
But I was really.
So it will slow.
It's just a physical solar implementation here in the United States. Things are going up, and now it's going to plateau or stop.
It is going to be fascinating. So the issue with wind permitting, the federal government can stop the windmills. On solar, period.
It's over.
So on windmills, it may be in very tough shape. And so that's going to drive up, like as electricity demand goes up, our prices are going to go up. On solar, some solar installations don't require a federal permit if they don't touch wetlands, if they're not on public land. So it's going to make it, you're going to you're going to have to find the right plot of land that allows you to implement solar. But I think the electricity demand is increasing. They're going to find those plots of land, but it's going to be slower and more expensive. So to your point, whatever curve we were on before is going to flatten out. Now, fortunately, there are a lot of other countries in the world, and they're actually accelerating their implementations. And so globally, it's going to slow. We're going to generate more emissions because the United States is going slower, but we're still going to see, we still expect CO2 emissions to peak and then come down, even with the actions the federal government is taking now. How about I can talk to you.
Now, from what we know that because the government policy has slowed down a little bit, but my understanding just from our neighboring real country, there are some private solar companies pursuing the solar system very aggressively, and they don't depend on the government subsidy. They are pretty much all private companies. And then I think, based on what I've heard, they have the vision, 5 years down the road with AI, definitely there is a huge demand of electricity. So they are in real company aggressively building up some system.
Yeah, I have a really cool map that I didn't put in here that shows all the solar installations in Illinois. And the US is headed in one direction. Illinois is headed in the exact opposite. So it looks, when I showed this to the city council, I said it looks like polka dots. It looks like a polka dot pattern in Illinois because so much solar is going in. And then the latest surge law gives the Illinois government the ability to force the building of some renewable power plant. If they believe we don't have enough generation capacity, they can initiate those investments. The ICC can do that all on their own. They have legal purpose, the legal authority to do that now that the surge law is passed. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
What?
Difficult to send this up. That was by far the best presentation ever.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if I.
Material. It was like the back of your hand. Seriously, I
probably spent too much time doing all this.
It came together really nicely. It was great.